Molly McCann versus Lara Procopio. We got minus 160 on I'm making sure that's actually the right number. Yeah, minus 160 on Molly McCann and plus 140 on Lara Procopio. Let's start off with Molly McCann, who's coming off a unfortunate loss to Tyler Santos last time around in a fight where she came in as a minus 140, minus 150 favorite. And a lot of people were on that Molly McCann train thinking, okay, she went out there and Russell fucked Diana Belbita. She should be able to do the same thing to Tyler Santos, who in her previous fight kind of got grapple fucked as well by Mara Romero Barella. But you gotta extrapolate a little bit. You can't just look strictly at the last fight. And if you extrapolate for Tyler Santos, especially her fight in the Contender Series, she looked absolutely amazing. Just on point every single aspect of MMA. Her striking looked great, her wrestling, her grappling, everything looked great. And it truly seemed in her UFC debut against Mara Romero Barella that it was just more so the jitters, or she just really wasn't feeling it that night, because that was just not a good that was not a good statement of who she actually is as a fighter. And we truly saw that come to fruition in her fight against Molly McCann. Now, Molly had a lot of issues trying to get Santos down, and she really couldn't get her striking game going either, which was a real bummer for her, considering that her background does come from the boxing world. She landed a couple good shots on Tyler Santos, but nothing incredible that really blew your hair back or anything like that. And then Santos was able to, get the better of the striking exchanges, push her up against the cage, get her to the ground, and control her on the ground as well too. I believe she accumulated close to 6 or 7 minutes of control time on Molly McCann there. Again, like I said in the fight before with Diana Belbita, it's not going so well for her in those first 3 minutes, where Belbita coming in as like a plus 350, plus 400 underdog, she goes in there and she kind of lights up Molly McCann in those first couple minutes. And then Molly decides, you know what, let me wrestle. And then she goes out there and she wrestles. I think she lands, I want to confirm this number, but I think she landed over 5 takedowns in that fight against Belbita. She landed 5 takedowns. She even got a 10-7 in that round too, due to a point taken away from Belbita, but it was a lot of one-way traffic in that second round. And then obviously she completes the third round by winning a decision there. But I don't know what people were thinking they were getting with Molly McCann going into that Tyler Santos fight. Like, they just see a grappling display on one fight, and then Santos struggling the fight before that. But again, extrapolate a little bit. Let's go back and then see what they actually look like. Maybe not in their UFC debuts or anything like that. So Molly McCann, I'll give this to her. Solid hands, solid striking. She does a good job of closing the distance to kind of land her bombs. But she doesn't have crazy striking to the point where you're like, okay, this is a Tyler Santos situation, or this is a Marina Rodriguez situation with Amanda Hebos. Like, she doesn't have that good of striking. Even Carl Hosa, like, I would take Carol Hosa in a fight against Molly McCann any day. And the reason I bring up Carol Hosa is that's the only fight that we've seen Lara Procopio have in the UFC. She goes out there and lands, I believe it was 170 strikes. Let me get that number right So Carol Hosa runs 171 strikes on Lara Procopio, and then Procopio in return lands 165 strikes of her own. And we're talking about Procopio, who's a jiu-jitsu player. She's a black belt. She trains with Novo Uniao and Andre Pederneiras and those guys. And, she trains with Ketlin Vieira, another high-level 135er. But her game is jiu-jitsu. So if you go back and watch her fights on the regional scenes, you see her, going for the takedown almost immediately, whether it's a body lock takedown, a trip up against the cage. She gets the opponents to the ground, and then she goes to work with the jiu-jitsu and pulls off a submission every now and then, has some ground and pound finishes. I'm very bummed that I wasn't able to find her last 2 fights before the UFC, because she won both of those fights via decision, and I'm kind of assuming that her jiu-jitsu had a lot to do with it. Now, she just wasn't able to close the distance properly against Carol Hosa, where she went 0-5 on takedown attempts. But, a lot of that was kind of desperation takedowns. And I don't think we'll really see true desperation takedowns here from her against Molly McCann, who could almost easily be bullied up against the cage. And at that point, I think that's where we'll see Procopio land some of her body lock takedowns or her trip takedowns, some takedowns that we've seen Molly McCann give up in the past. and just going through her IG as well with Procopio, you see her really working on her strength and conditioning. She knows she needs to get a little bit stronger, especially going up against some of these women. She's 5'4", with a 67-inch reach. For Molly McCann, we're getting 5'4" with a 62-inch reach. So slightly bigger frame on Procopio here. But again, it's for her to be successful in this fight, I truly believe she needs to get this fight to the ground. I think Molly McCann could land some good shots on the feet. And again, Procopio kind of holding her own against Carol Hossa. Obviously outstruck, like damage-wise, it was obviously Carol Hossa's game. But to still go out there and land as many strikes as she did, it was very, very impressive in my end. And not to mention, look at Carol Hossa's face in that fight. Like, she took some damage. It's not like they were pitter-patter 165 strikes that were landing on Hossa. Some of them did have a little bit of pop on them too, and she definitely busted up the nose of Hossa in that fight. So I don't think it's going to be a complete wipeout for Molly McCann on the feet, but I think Procopio will be able to kind of hold her own enough to eventually drag this fight to the ground and then really get her jiu-jitsu game going, which is where I think she's very live to even pull off a submission victory here. We saw Jillian Robertson pull off a submission on Molly McCann in her UFC debut, and you could probably chalk it up to a little bit of butterflies. It's in your hometown, Liverpool. You know what I mean? Like, it might have caught up to her. So I'll give McCann a little bit of a pass there. But when you're talking about a black belt in jiu-jitsu here, who most of her wins earlier in her career came via submission, I could definitely see her pull off a submission here against Molly McCann as well too. So I'm going to be leaning with the grappler here. And I do get shades of like poor man's Amanda Hebus and poor man's Marina Rodriguez, in the sense that Molly McCann is a striker. And Procopio is obviously the grappler here, but I don't think that we'll see a Marina Rodriguez type starching from Molly McCann here. More so I'll see, them play on the feet a little bit, and then when Procopio, once she can really push this fight up against the cage and start to drag it to the floor and start to use her top position. So at plus 140, it's not a bad spot for Procopio, who I think will have the more dominant grappling and be able to get this fight to the ground more often than not. We obviously know takedowns usually score a lot more than what you'll see on the feet. And even if Molly McCann wants to take this fight to the ground, I think that would be a mistake on her end, trying to have to deal with the black belt in jiu-jitsu from Procopio, because she is quite active from her guard, which is very, very impressive. Something that I usually like to see from black belts. It's great to have a black belt, but if you're not offensive with it and trying to make your opponent uncomfortable and try to nullify the strikes that are coming from on top, then I don't really rate you. But Procopio, you see it. When she's on her back, she's working for arm bars. She's working for reversals. She's definitely on it more often than not. So I like what I see from Procopio, and I'm not sure why I had this negative perception of what I was thinking Procopio was coming into this fight. Again, she got starched by Carl Horsa. Not starched, but unanimously outstruck over 50 minutes against Carol Hossa. But again, Hossa is a legitimate striker. Procopio does her best work in the grappling. She wasn't able to get it there, but I do think she'll be able to get it there against Molly McCann. So in a fight that I see closer to 50-50 and possibly even giving Procopio an edge in terms of possibly being a favorite here, I think we're getting some solid line value at plus 140 on Procopio, and people are getting hip to it. We got plus 165, I believe, was the open on Procopio, down to plus 140. I think that we'll see this line start to tighten up the closer that the fight gets. So I'll probably have to toss a little bit of a bet here on Procopio. Again, it's a little bit of the Molly McCann fade, but also when you take the styles and the history into consideration, you got to see that Molly McCann, 33% takedown defense. She's gotten taken down 8 out of 12 attempts against her, and Procopio is definitely going to be searching for that. And people might want to discredit Procopio a little bit just because of the desperation takedowns they saw later in the fight against Carol Hossa, but that's not how she gets her takedowns. That's her after 13 minutes of getting beat up in the face. You know what I mean? She's not going to get to that point. I think she'll be more successful with the takedowns earlier in the fight against Molly McCann. Again, push her up against the cage. The types of takedowns that Procopio uses to get fights to the ground are takedowns that I've seen other fighters use against Molly McCann and be very successful with it. So, I like Procopio here. I think she's live for a submission too. So just to be ballsy here, I'll go out there and say she wins via first or second round submission. She's really going to put that black belt to use, and I really think it will make her live to get a submission victory here. So once again, I'll go with Lara Procopio to win this fight via second round submission.